Hailie Deegan's had conversations about potentially joining the Haas factory team in 2025, and Kyle Busch calls out Corey LaJoie on the Pat McAfee podcast and calls him a liar. What's going on, guys? It's Daniel, and welcome back to the video. We got some NASCAR and other motorsports stories discussed today on the channel. Let's go ahead and just jump straight into those really quickly. We're going to begin by talking about PPG, as it was announced earlier today that PPG has signed a 5-year extension with Team Penske. They're going to be associate sponsor on all their NASCAR Cup Series cars. They're also going to be a full season sponsor, I think, for Joseph Newgarden going forward, and they're going to sponsor the Brickyard 400 going forward as well. PPG has been with Penske, I think, for the last 7 or 8 years, so it's really huge to see that they're going to continue their partnership going forward. I think it's an absolutely huge deal, and really happy and glad to see that PPG will continue working with Team Penske, at least for the next 5 years. And now we're going ahead, jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we're talking about Bubba Wallace. Now, Bubba Wallace earlier tonight in the Brickyard 400 was able to score a top 5 in this year's Brickyard 400. This is Bubba Wallace's 4th top 5 of the season, I believe, and his 8th top 10 of 2024. This 23 team is building a lot of momentum right now. Over the course of the last 4 weeks, he has finished 7th, 13th at Chicago, finished, I believe, in 8th or something like that last week at Pocono, and finished actually 10th at Pocono, and finished today in 5th. He did an excellent job on the racetrack, put up a really good performance, had the pace and speed to contend, won a stage as well. I think he's only 7 points below the cutoff line. I think Bubba Wallace and this 23 team are building a lot of momentum, and I think that 23 team is only going to continue getting better. He continues to do great things, and he did an excellent and great job in this year's Brickyard 400. And now we're going ahead, jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we're talking about the Hungarian Grand Prix. As before the NASCAR Cup Series race and the IndyCar race took place, you had the Hungarian Grand Prix, and it was a very controversial one. The race is mainly dominated by Oscar Piastri, but with about 25 laps to go in this race, McLaren, for whatever reason, decided to bring Lando Norris in first. That eventually gave Lando Norris the lead because it took them a few laps. Then they decided to pit Oscar with about 20 laps to go. And Oscar had to do everything he could to try to catch up. There was frustration on the radio, but eventually with about 3 laps to go, we saw Oscar Piastri get up there and pass Lando Norris for the race lead. Now, Lando tried everything to get around him at the end, but Oscar pulled out the pretty big lead and was able to get his first career Formula 1 win. I think I stated this many times before. I am not a big fan of team orders, and team orders ruin racing. If this stuff happened in NASCAR, fans would be rioting and they would be super frustrated. And I'm not a big fan of team orders. I feel bad for Oscar because I think Oscar absolutely earned the win, and he never should have been in that position to begin with. I get that they wanted to help Oscar get the win, but I also think that Lando probably shouldn't have given up the position. So I feel bad for both drivers in a sense because they got put in a terrible and a really, really bad position, in my honest opinion. And now we're going ahead, jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we're talking about Kyle Busch. Now, earlier this evening, Kyle Busch put out a tweet apologizing to his fans about the wreck that happened at the end of the Brickyard 400. Kyle Busch was attempting to score a top 5 finish in this year's Brickyard 400 and was looking for a fantastic run. Unfortunately, coming to 2 laps to go in this race, he was super aggressive, got under Denny Hamlin, and unfortunately spun out in turn number 3. Tough break for Kyle Busch. Obviously, it's been a bad stretch. We're going to be talking about Kyle Busch quite a bit in this episode. But Kyle Busch, obviously, I feel bad for because he's been having the pace and speed recently. And it's a shame to see that he did not have a good run because he made a little bit of mistake. It's a tough break for Kyle. It really sucks to see. I think Kyle's still a very solid and great driver to this day. And it's a shame that the RCR cars haven't had the pace. But when you have a good run, you can't also make the mistakes that he makes. Disappointing for sure that it ended. I know if Kyle Busch feels bad. I know he wants to run well. Trust me, I think he runs the run better, and hopefully he can run better going forward. He needs a couple weeks off at this point to try to see if he can get better once we come back from the break. Starting at Richmond, though I'm not sure the speed and pace is going to be there for those cars at RCR. They're going to have to make some big changes, which we might be talking about here in just a little bit. And now we're going ahead, jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we're talking about Conor Zilisch. As on Friday late afternoon to early evening, Conor Zilisch was able to pick up the win in the ARCA race at Indianapolis Raceway Park. That is his 3rd consecutive ARCA win, and he's been undefeated so far this year. Conor Zilisch continues to impress on a week-by-week basis and continues to go out there and win races. Conor's one of the biggest talents out there. There's a lot of talk and conversations that he'd probably be moving up to the NASCAR Xfinity Series next year to drive for Venturini Motorsports, the rumors of Sam Mayer going over to Front Row next year. Conor's been doing an incredible job in ARCA. He had to hold up a hard-charging William Swalch at the end, but I think he did a very excellent and great job. And congratulations to him on picking up his 3rd career ARCA win. He's been super dominant. He's been winning everything he's been getting into. Congratulations to him on winning the ARCA race at the Indianapolis Raceway Park. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about the IndyCar race at Toronto. Before the NASCAR Cup Series racing during the Brickyard 400, y'all said the IndyCar race at Toronto going on. Colin Herta dominated the majority of this race. There were a couple of big incidents and wrecks happened early. I believe Augustine Canapino and I believe someone else crashed out early in this race. And then it got a long green flag run with Colin Herta and Kyle Kirkwood staying first and second. But then everything changed with about 15 laps to go with Kith and Simpson getting in the outside wall. Then they had a restart and chaos would ensue. We saw Santino Ferrucci go up in the air, had a war crash in the inside of turn number 1, and it just turned to chaos. Thank God Santino Ferrucci's okay. That was a really scary and terrible accident. And then there was another crash between Scott McLaughlin and I believe Will Power, if I'm not mistaken. So a couple major threats of contenders for the championship taking each other out, and Scott was not happy. At the end of the day, Colin Herta had enough of a gap over Kyle Kirkwood, and he come out the final corner and win his first race since Indianapolis Road Course in 2022 in May. Colton earned this win. He was the fastest all weekend. He's been close to winning multiple races many times this year, and it's really good to see him finally get that first win of the year. It's also the first win for Andretti, so congratulations to Colin Herta on winning the IndyCar race at Toronto. I think he earned it, and he did an excellent and fantastic job to get the victory, in my honest opinion. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Shannon Wirsch. As it was reported by Joseph Strigley, and this is noted on the Fox broadcast during the ARCA race, that Shannon Wirsch is no longer working at Venturini Motorsports as the crew chief for the number 20 car. Shannon Wirsch has been the crew chief for the 20 car over the course of the last couple of years. He's led drivers like Jesse Love to multiple ARCA championships or last year's ARCA championship. Rumor is he's gone to Kevin Harvick Incorporated, and he's working there. Venturini Motorsports is dropping like fries. I think Kevin Reed Jr. is now working as a crew chief for the team, if I'm not mistaken, so it seems like they're dropping like flies. Shannon's done a lot of great things. He's won multiple championships, and I think he's done an excellent and great job with the Venturini Motorsports group, and you kind of could tell the performance is bad because they just were struggling over the race. It's a shame to see Shannon no longer working over there, but with all this stuff coming out, I'm not surprised and shocked to see that he's no longer working there, and it's rumored that he potentially could be headed over to work with Kevin Harvick Incorporated in the not-so-distant future. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Shane Van Gisbergen. Now, Shane Van Gisbergen, we did a video talking about this a couple days ago, but Shane Van Gisbergen completed his first trip at Indianapolis Motor Speedway and finished a very impressive 4th place. That is his second career top 5 on an oval in the NASCAR Xfinity Series, and I believe that is his 5th top 5 finish of 2024 as well. Shane is continuing to get better. He started back in 23rd, but he moved his way theoretically up to the front. It was a fantastic run. He did an amazing job, and he put on a really awesome and hell of a good performance. He wasn't as fast as drivers like Aric Almirola, who we're going to talk about later, and Cole Custer, Riley Herbst as well, who we're also going to talk about later in this episode. But Shane did a really awesome and incredible job, and congratulations to him on a very solid and fantastic run. He did a really good job to get a top 5 finish. He was really fast, was really, really good. Congratulations to him on getting a top 5 finish. He did an excellent and great job, in my honest and sincere opinion. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Kurt Busch. As there was, I think, a tweet from Dustin Albino or something like that, if I'm not mistaken, on Twitter. And apparently Kurt Busch was spotted at the ARCA race at Indianapolis Raceway Park and the truck race as well to support his friend Marco Andretti. Kurt Busch was also spotted at Indianapolis Motor Speedway helping out the 2311 racing guys. It's still good to see that Kurt Busch is around. Trust me, I wish that Kurt Busch was still racing in NASCAR to this day. He's still not medically cleared, to my understanding, to come back, and it seems like he's fully retired at this point. Though there's been times and there's been speculation that Kurt Busch in the not-so-distant future could get an chance and opportunity maybe to come back with 2311. But it's good to see that he's sticking around, working with 2311, helping them out, and it's good to see that he was in Indianapolis Raceway Park, supporting drivers, probably also helping Corey Heim in the future go to 2311. I think that it's good to see him back at the track. Very happy to see that he's returned to the track and is working at IRP to help people out there. And now we're going ahead, jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Auto Club Speedway. Now, this is a post that came on Reddit, and Reddit's Twitter page on Twitter basically went ahead and posted this. According to this, there is a warehouse that was built on the racetrack. Now, obviously, Auto Club Speedway, there's been rumors, speculation that they are trying to turn that into a short track, and they really haven't made a lot of progress. They're still working on it, but there was a report that came out recently that apparently a crane dropped on the racetrack in a demolition area. We do not know when Auto Club Speedway is going to get done, but the fact that there's a warehouse that's been spotted there is really, really concerning, especially for the future of this track. It's just called California or Next Gen Raceway or something like that is what they're calling that at this point. And I really hope that they can get this track done in the future because I certainly would love to see a short track race there. I know that the Next Gen cars have generally not raced favorably and well, but I really do want to see a race at Auto Club. And to see some of the stuff going on, it is really disappointing to look at. But I'm not really shocked and surprised about it. It doesn't surprise me. It's a little concerning for sure, but like I said, it's really not shocking and surprising to see some of the stuff going on. It seems like they don't want to get it built at this point. There's been a lot of frustration about that. Obviously, money's a big thing, and obviously you need a lot of money if you're going to be able to support something like this. Hopefully, they are able to figure this out going forward and don't have any more issues and stop building warehouses around the racetrack. And now we're going ahead, jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Corey Heim and Christian Eckes. Now, if you've been watching the truck series this whole entire year, the two dominant trucks so far this year, for the most part, have been Corey Heim and Christian Eckes. They have both combined to win 8 of the 15 races so far. And it seems like this little rivalry has officially begun. During the Truck Series race at IRP, about halfway through the race, there was some contact between Corey Heim and Christian Eckes. Now, it looked to me like Christian Eckes really did nothing wrong, and Corey might have just been a little bit over-aggressive. And then, unfortunately, Corey Heim got a flat tire about halfway through the race and showed his displeasure to Christian Eckes. Then, after the race concluded, Corey Heim went up to confront Christian Eckes. The conversation definitely was a little heated, but you really didn't see any punches or shoves thrown out there. When I look at the situation with Corey Heim and Christian Eckes, I really don't think anybody did anything wrong. I think Corey Heim kind of overreacted, and I get that Corey Heim wants to be super competitive and win races, but that truck wasn't good after the damage, and it seemed like to me that Corey Heim was more at fault for the situation and the wreck than Christian Eckes. Christian really did nothing wrong, in my opinion, and I know Christian said that Corey had every right to be upset, but I completely disagree. I think personally that Corey Heim overreacted in the situation, and for a driver that's been rumored to be moving up the cup in the not-so-distant future, you got to keep your head on straight, and if you do stupid stuff like this, you may never get the chance and opportunity to move up. So I really hope that going forward in the future, we don't see more rivalries, but trust me, I do think there's going to be more coming from this in the not-so-distant future. So it was very surprising to see these two get into it, but when you're so close to each other and running against each other on a week-by-week basis, it's not the most surprising and shocking thing overall. So I'm not really surprised to see this, in my honest opinion. And now we're going ahead, jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Noah Gragson and Carson Hocevar. Now, front stretch report on this, I think Steven Supp was the one who spoke to Noah Gragson about this, but apparently after the race, Noah Gragson and Carson Hocevar had a conversation. Both drivers had very respectful runs. Carson Hocevar, I believe, finished in the top 15, and Noah Gragson finished in the top 10, around 7th or 8th position. Generally, both of them had great runs. But it seems like Noah Gragson was very frustrated with the way Carson Hocevar has been racing a lot of people and called Carson Hocevar out in a pretty big way. Look, Carson Hocevar has been a driver that's been a little bit in over his head. And you look at the wreck incident that happened at Indianapolis, I think Carson was a little bit over-aggressive. Yes, Blaney came down a little bit for sure in the big wreck, but I do think that Carson Hocevar should know a lot better. He took out two drivers like Joey Logano and Jimmy Johnson, and there was times today where he was super aggressive. And I get that you got to be aggressive and try to make up as many positions as possible, but at the same time, you got to keep your head on straight. You just got penalized very recently, and you don't want to piss off any more drivers going forward, especially when you're trying to win the Rookie of the Year honors and you're trying to get as much experience as possible. Again, I think he did a really good job today, Carson, but he's got to keep his head on straight and not make a lot of mistakes and don't piss off a lot of drivers. And we're going to be pissing off a driver that's still going to be in the Cup Series like Noah Gragson, who is going to be a front row next year. You don't want to make him mad. I don't think these two will have any more issues going forward, but we'll have to wait and see. We've been surprised before. We may see more issues going forward, but personally, I don't think we'll see any more issues between these two drivers going forward, in my honest opinion. And now we're going ahead, jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about the Bristol tire test. Now, this is something I really did not cover on this channel, but there was a Bristol tire test that took place this past week at Bristol Motor Speedway for all the drivers congregated over to the Brickyard 400. And Chase Briscoe spoke to the media about this tire test. And he said it was a lot warmer than what it was in the spring. And he says it still wore out in 40 laps. But he also did say that with there potentially being cooler conditions going forward, it may race a lot differently because remember, there's only 6 cars around the racetrack. I think Chase Briscoe was one. I think John Hunter Nemechek might have been one if I'm not mistaken. I think Ty Gibbs was out there, somebody like that. I think there are a few other drivers that were at this next-gen test. One of the big things that was talked about Bristol last time we were there is the tire wear. These tires are wearing out really quickly, and I still thought it was one of the best races. I would like to see maybe a way where they can extend the tire wear to maybe be about 60 or 70 laps, but I also want to see where drivers can fall off and we can see a lot of passing because that's been one of the biggest Achilles heels of the short track racing especially, is it's been very difficult to pass with this next-gen car. So I really am kind of intrigued of how the racing is going to be at Bristol later this year. I hope it's better than what we saw in the fall last year. So I think they're going to be running the same compound that they ran in the spring and also in the fall last year, which I think is very exciting as well. So we'll see what happens in regards to that, and we'll see what kind of comes from this. But trust me, I want to see good racing at Bristol. And I'm kind of encouraged by these comments in regards to the amount of tire wear. I really don't hope anything changes. I really hope they kind of keep the same stuff going into the time we do get to Bristol Motor Speedway. And now we're going ahead, jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about the second to last restart at Indianapolis Motor Speedway for the Brickyard 400. So there was a lot of controversy that happened, and here's what NASCAR said in regards to what happened. NASCAR says with the situation with Brad Keselowski, who had ran out of gas, Kyle Larson moved up on the front row. Now NASCAR says that Kyle Larson did not jump the restart. Now when we take a look at this restart that happened here on the front straightaway, there's definitely a little bit of controversy, and it's definitely a little bit of gray area here. To me, Ryan Blaney was a control car on the restart, and I get that Brad Keselowski was the initial driver who was in control of the race, but he had to come down pit road because he was pretty much out of gas. In that situation, Ryan Blaney should know at that particular moment that he is a control car in the race. I get that Ryan Blaney's upset and frustrated because I'd be pissed off too if I had lost the lead. And Ryan Blaney was not really happy about it on the radio. Then Kyle Larson kind of threw a jab not too long ago and basically kind of said, hey, basically, thank you NASCAR for kind of giving me a win in a very jokingly way. A lot of fans are really frustrated. A lot of people feel like that Ryan Blaney was robbed of a Brickyard 400 win. I still think Kyle Larson would win the Brickyard 400 whether or not that late caution for Kyle Busch came out. I still think he had a good chance to get it done, but I think there's definitely going to be a lot of controversy around it, and I think how the race finished with that last caution coming out, I feel like they waited way too long for the yellow. I think they should have thrown the caution way sooner. I get they wanted to see if Ryan Preece could get back moving, but at the same time, I think they waited way too long to make the judgment call, and once again, NASCAR made a lot of really bad judgment calls in this race, and that's something they're going to have to work on over these off weeks going forward. To me, when I look at the restart, I really don't think Kyle Larson jumped the restart either. I feel bad for Ryan Blaney. I understand his frustration. Believe me on that. But at the same token, at the same time, I understand that Larson really did nothing wrong. He did what he's supposed to do, and that's all that matters at this point because Kyle Larson is the true winner of this year's Brickyard 400. And now we're going ahead, jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about the Indianapolis NASCAR Xfinity Series finish. Now, a couple days ago, you had the Xfinity Series race on Saturday. And for the most part, this race had some intriguing moments for sure. But for the most part, the race is kind of a little bit of boring. But the end of the race was really, really fun. You had 3 drivers that were in play going for the win and the victory. You had Cole Custer was leading at the time. You had Aric Almirola and Riley Herbst who were trying to catch Cole Custer. And as the race in the ending progressed, Riley Herbst was starting to make up a ton of ground because Riley had the faster car. And coming to 2 laps ago, Riley Herbst got a fantastic and great run on the leader Cole Custer, who we'll talk about a little bit later on this episode in regards to his future. But he got a great run and moved to the outside. Then Aric Almirola sends it up to the outside, sends a 3 wide, and he gets the lead from both of the SHR drivers, while Riley Herbst moves up the second position. And Riley Herbst makes up a ton of ground, and going in the final corner, Riley Herbst gets absolutely sideways going into turn number 3, but is able to make the pass coming down the straightaway. Aric Almirola and Cole Custer are trying everything to run him down, but it's not enough. And coming off the final corner, Riley Herbst is able to pick up his first win of the season. That was one of the best finishes I've seen in Xfinity this year. It was a great finish, a really natural-born finish. It was very, very fun to watch. I think all three drivers put on a great show. All three drivers who've either been at SHR at one point or, of course, are driving for SHR at this moment, though one or two, all of them won't be at SHR because SHR is going away. It's really huge for Tony Stewart as well to see them get the victory, but I also think it's an excellent and fantastic race as a whole at Indianapolis Motor Speedway. I thought the finish was excellent. It was a great finish. And Riley Herbst was an absolute wheelman. He earned the win. I think he had the fastest car. He put up a hell of a performance, and he did a really great job this past weekend in the NASCAR Xfinity Series race at Indianapolis. I think he did an excellent and fantastic job. It was a really awesome race at Indianapolis Motor Speedway. And now we're going ahead, jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Richard Childress Racing. Now, we're again going to talk about Kyle Busch a little bit later in this episode. But Kyle Busch actually also was asked questions about the future of RCR. He does say he's actually been involved in some of the meetings in regards to the plan changes that are coming over at Richard Childress Racing in the near future. And they said they actually had someone that was signed to go over to RCR. Now, who could this person be that's been signed at Richard Childress Racing, who we all thought was going to be going there, but they lost? I think it's Rodney Childers. There were rumors and speculation that Rodney Childers was a candidate to potentially go over to Richard Childress Racing for 2025 to be kind of a management role. But Rodney Childers did not want to move into a management role from what he said. He wanted to still be working as a crew chief and work with both of the drivers. Obviously, we know they think that Justin Alexander is still crew chief for Austin Dillon next season, and we know Kyle Busch is expected to be back at RCR in 2025. I think Rodney Childers would have done a lot of great things for RCR, but I think he's going to be able to help out Chevy altogether working with the Spire Motorsports team. I think there's going to be some other major executive changes that are coming over to RCR in the future, which I think is going to really help the team and the organization going into next year. It's going to be really fun to kind of see what happens with the team and see where things go for RCR, because this is a team that really needs to work on getting better. And I really hope whatever changes that they are truly making over at Rich Childress Racing next year, it really can help, because trust me, this is a team that absolutely needs to get better, especially if they're going to want to be competitive going into the future. So we'll see what happens with RCR and what other changes they're making, but it sounds like there's some other pretty massive and major changes coming to Richard Childress Racing in the not-so-distant future that probably could be announced during these off weeks. And now we're going ahead, jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Chandler Smith. Now, if you were on Twitter last night, if you're browsing Twitter, or X is what they call it now, you probably saw a tweet last night from Chandler Smith. Sam Mayer was frustrated at AJ Allmendinger sending up 3 wide. Well, Chandler Smith actually kind of called out, I think, not only AJ Allmendinger, but he also called out Sam Mayer as well. Now, I have to go back to last week. Chandler Smith was not very happy with Sam Mayer last week at Pocono. He expressed frustration. I think SVG also expressed frustration after Sam got in the back of SVG during the race. But we saw Chandler Smith get into the inside of his car and was very frustrated with Sam Mayer about incidents in contact. And it seems like a lot of drivers have seen what Sam has been able to do and kind of has a bad reputation as a driver in the sport. And I think a lot of drivers are generally frustrated with the etiquette that we've seen from Sam Mayer. Sam Mayer is obviously rumored to be moving up to the Cup Series next year, but if he is going to move up to the Cup Series next year, he really needs to get it together and start racing with a lot more respect. Otherwise, when he moves up the Cup next year, he's going to have a lot of drivers that are not very happy with him. So he needs to turn it around going forward. He needs to get his head on straight, because you've got drivers that are not very happy with you in the series, and he may still be competing, because we know Chandler Smith most likely is staying in the NASCAR Xfinity Series next year, though there have been rumors that he can move up the Cup. It's going to be very interesting to see what happens going forward. It seems like we got a little rivalry on our hands between Sam Mayer and Chandler Smith. Very interesting to see him call him out. We've seen some of this kind of happening on Twitter or X as of late, and I do think you'll see more beef and tempers happening between people on social media going forward into the future. And now we're going ahead, jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about the 2025 schedule. Now, someone asked a question about Pockets about when is the 2025 NASCAR schedule expected to be released. Well, according to Bob Pockers, it sounds like the schedule is not expected to be released now till the middle of August. We are getting closer and closer to the end of this season. And remember, this schedule for 2025 was supposed to be released at the end of May going into early June around the Gateway weekend. But there's a couple reasons that things are getting held up. Number one, there has not been official announcement whether or not the Chicago Street Course is truly going to be back in 2025. There's been no official announcement on that. The other reason why it's not been released is because they're trying to figure out if they're going to go to Mexico City next year or they're going to go to Montreal. But many people are expecting that they're going to get that deal with Mexico City done here very, very soon. And we might have an announcement with that during the summer break. I would like to see schedule get released sooner rather than later, because the longer we wait on this, the more longer it is going to take. And it's definitely a little bit frustrating because I've been wanting to see a schedule release. We've all been kind of waiting for it to come out, and there's been no word on when exactly the schedule is going to come out for 2025. Again, it's really frustrating because I think a lot of us are tired of waiting around, waiting for the schedule to get released. I do think it will get released in the not-so-distant future. I don't think we're going to be waiting a horrendous amount of time for it to get done, but I think all of us are sick and tired of waiting. We want to see the 2025 schedule get released so we can focus on talking about what the schedule looks like and what exactly is not just for the Cup Series, but they're for the Xfinity Series and Truck Series, because most likely all three series will be released at the same time. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about charter negotiations. Now, I didn't really talk about this on the channel, but Denny Hamlin confirmed to Steven Taranto, who I think works at CBS Sports, and I think Claire B. Lane caught up with Bragzowski as well. But according to reports from this past week, it sounds like that there has been a counter argument from the teams, and the teams have sounded a counter proposal in regards to the charter negotiations. Here's a big thing to know in regards to that. The teams are wanting more money. They're wanting, I think, around 40-45% of the TV and media revenue, and they are also wanting, I think, 33% of the gambling and the new media revenue that's coming in as well, and they want a bigger part of that. We have been hearing, though, more and more bad things coming out from NASCAR side, and the offers that the teams are being set by NASCAR, they seem to just be getting worse, and the teams are not very happy about it. And we are getting closer to that deadline. We're starting to get into the red zone at this point. We are now getting into the end of July, and the charter deal technically has to be done by December 31st. Otherwise, those charters become obsolete, and they can go away altogether, which I think NASCAR probably has a clause, and they probably find a way to get their money back. And obviously, a lot of teams spend around $25 to $40 million, though the charter money is going down. It sounds like we could have movement happening soon, and we also have heard that they're looking to have they want permanent charters, and they're also looking to have a cap on how many charters teams can have, which I think is going to frustrate the teams in some pretty big way. So we'll kind of see what happens with the charter agreement going forward and what other details do come out from that. But I do believe that some of the teams want stuff to happen and they want to move on it. They want to get this charter agreement done, and I hope we do get a charter agreement done soon because it's been way too long. We need to get movement on that so we can move on and talk about other things, and we stop talking about charter negotiations going forward. Bragzowski's optimistic that they're going to get it done, while people like Denny Hamlin seem to be a little bit negative and pessimistic about getting it done. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Kyle Busch. Now, we're going to talk about more Kyle Busch on the Pat McAfee show in just a little bit, but I think this is something that was talked about on the Pat McAfee show. He was asked by Pat, how much longer are you going to be racing in NASCAR? Well, Kyle Busch responded to Pat by saying that he has another 5 or 6 more years in NASCAR. Kyle Busch has been in the NASCAR Cup Series since 2004 on a part-time basis, but has been full-time in NASCAR since 2005. Statistically, this has been the worst season that Kyle Busch has had so far. He's only scored, I think, 6 top 10s altogether. Bubba Wallace has more top 10s so far this year. And not only that, I think Noah Gragson also has more top 10s so far this season. This A team has been really struggling. Now, the big question is going to be how much longer is Kyle Busch going to stick around at Richard Childress Racing, because Kyle Busch has been RCR now for 2 more years. We do know he has signed an extension. They've basically kind of agreed to an extra year with him. But how much longer is Kyle Busch going to want to stick around if this team cannot get better? That's one thing that will be determined. There is a chance that Kyle Busch could go over to Spire Motorsports if he doesn't stick around with RCR. Obviously, Hendrick Motorsports is not going to be a viable option as all 4 drivers at Hendrick are set at least through 2025. But Kyle Larson, Chase Elliott is set through 2027, and William Byron are all going to get contract extensions probably within the next year or so, especially since the fact that Kyle Larson just won the Brickyard 400 recently and picked up his 4th win of the year. They're all going to get contract extensions here soon. So I do think you'll see the contracts get signed soon over there. JGR is also not going to be an option because Chase Briscoe has multiple years. I'm going to contentedly go to the 11 car potentially if Denny Hamlin leaves at the end of the year and retires. But I don't see Kyle Busch going back to JGR unless they offer him a ton of money. It's going to be very kind of interesting to see what happens in regards to how much longer Kyle Busch sticks around with RCR. But I do think he will in the near future probably leave Rich Schultz Racing because I do think he goes Spire in the future. I think he will end up there. I want to see him go there. Because I think Spire is a growing organization. He does help them in the truck series. I think 2026 is going to be very interesting, and we could see in the near future Kyle Busch leave and go to a team like Spire Motorsports, which I truly think could be something good for him, and I do think it could be very successful for Kyle Busch if he was to go to a team like Spire Motorsports in like 2026. And now we're going to ahead, jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Kyle Larson. Now, Kyle Larson, of course, ended up winning the 2024 Brickyard 400. And he said basically after he won the race that he is hoping to be back in May for next year's Indianapolis 500. Now, Kyle Larson, like I said, is still hoping to run the Indy 500 once again next year. He competed in this year's Indy 500, and he was very fast and competitive. One of the fastest cars in qualifying, I believe, inside the top 6 and making the Fast 6. I think he actually started 5th in the Indy 500 and fell back a little bit, but unfortunately got a speeding penalty, but he was able to finish on the lead lap and finish, I believe, in 17th position where his car number was. Now, Rick Hendrick did say they still have not gotten a deal finalized at this point, but Kyle Larson spoke to Bob Pockers, and he says that they are getting close to having a deal done. I want to see Kyle Larson run the Indy 500 once again because Kyle Larson was extremely impressive and super quick this year. He was one of the fastest cars on overall pace and speed, and had he not gotten that speeding penalty, which I think that's something that'll learn from, he would have been up in that lead pack. For someone that doesn't have a lot of IndyCar experience, it was just super impressive to watch all the stuff that Kyle Larson was able to do. And I certainly do think that he will be a major threat and contender if he does get the chance once again to run the Indianapolis 500. He's one of the best drivers in the world. He gets behind the car and anything, it really doesn't matter. He is one of the best drivers in the world, and I think Arrow McLaren, they would be very, very wise to have him in the car once again. I know they're talking about, they actually tweeted him winning the Brickyard 400 with the papaya colors, which was really awesome to see the papaya colors go to victory lane. It was really fun to watch what Kyle Larson can do. I know his win, like I already mentioned earlier, was extremely controversial, but at the same token and same time, it was amazing and great to see Kyle Larson able to win in Indianapolis. It does sound like they're having talks about running the Indy 500 again next year. It sounds like they're getting close to having it done. I do want to see it happen again because I do think that Kyle Larson can be a major threat, and I certainly think he will truly be a contender if he does truly get the chance and opportunity to run it. So I really hope they make it happen. We'll kind of see what happens in regards to that, and we'll see if Kyle Larson does, in fact, get the chance and opportunity to run the Indy 500 once again in 2025. I think he truly should get the opportunity to do it once again. And now we're going to head jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Riley Herbst. Now we're going to talk about the major Haas factory team announcement here in just a little bit. But one thing that was mentioned during the Haas factory team announcement is that apparently Joe Custer and the people from Haas factory have offered Riley Herbst an opportunity to return to the Xfinity Series once again with the organization with Haas factory. They are going to have 2 NASCAR Xfinity Series teams in 2025, and Riley Herbst does, of course, bring a lot of sponsorship and funding with them, and with the success that Riley Herbst has had, including winning the Indianapolis Xfinity race in a really great finish there, they're wanting to bring him back. However, according to reports, it sounds like he is exploring options in the NASCAR Cup Series, and Joe Custer even mentioned that during the press conference as well yesterday. Rumors and speculation currently at the moment are going rampant, but rumor is that Riley Herbst is going to move up to the Cup Series in 2025 and drive the third 2311 racing car. And if you want to really get some interesting context, after Riley Herbst won the Xfinity Series race yesterday in Indianapolis, Denny Hamlin tweeted out, "Impressive." Basically, very impressive to see him get sideways, and people in the industry were congratulating him on the win. Look, is Riley Herbst the best driver in the world? No, absolutely not. But if you look in the improvement from Riley Herbst, he's really been showing his stuff. He's been in the top 10 in points all year long. He's not been as good as Cole Custer, but he has had some pretty solid and good runs so far this season. And I think he has earned the chance and opportunity to move up with 2311 Racing if he gets the chance. I do think that Corey Heim is a better driver, and I think he would be a better driver to put behind the wheel, which I think is why a lot of people are frustrated about this, is because they feel like that Corey Heim would do a much better job behind the wheel of this seat than Riley Herbst would do. But at the same token, same time, I really do think that Riley Herbst has earned the chance and opportunity to get behind the wheel of a Cup Series car next year. I know some mentioned Rick Ware is a possibility as well, but everyone's linking him to 2311, especially with the money, the monster money, and Troy Hart's family really helping with the charter. And we know that 2311 Racing is trying to find a way to save money in regards to getting another charter. They're expected to pick up one of the SHR charters going into next year. We talked about that. Same with Trackhouse as well. And Riley Herbst is currently the favorite to get it. I know some people don't really like Riley Herbst. I wasn't the biggest fan of Riley Herbst either, believe me. But at the same token, same time, if you have the opportunity and chance to put Riley Herbst behind the wheel, and he does have funding with him, trust me, you've got to take the funding and you got to take the sponsorship. So I think it's not a bad decision to put him behind the wheel, and it sounds like there could be a deal done in the not-so-distant future with Riley Herbst getting in that car next season. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Aric Almirola. Now, Aric Almirola, after finishing in third in the NASCAR Series race in Indianapolis Motor Speedway, competing for the win there after having a fantastic run in his return, was asked by Bob Pockrass about questions in regards to what happened between him and Bubba Wallace in a competition meeting. Aric Almirola basically politely declined to comment. He actually basically said, I respect what you guys do as media, but he basically said no comment in regards to what happened. For those who do not know, Aric Almirola was indefinitely suspended by Joe Gibbs Racing after a competition meeting fight had broken out at a Toyota competition meeting. Many had speculated that it was a Joe Gibbs competition meeting, but it turned out it was a Toyota competition meeting. And according to what reports had suggested, it sounds like the aggressor was not Bubba Wallace like initial reports had suggested. It sounds like that Aric Almirola might have been the aggressor. Now, we're not exactly going to know everything that's come out, but Bubba Wallace stated back, I believe, at Nashville during that week, they kind of called Aric Almirola Two-Face back at Charlotte, and these two have had a lot of history before. You go back all the way to 2018. Bubba Wallace was substituting, of course, for Aric Almirola in 2017 after his injury at Kansas, and Bubba got a not-so-great tweet or a text from Aric Almirola basically telling him, good luck, you're going to need it. These two have had a beef for a long time. Then you go a few years later in 2023 to the Coke 600. Bubba apparently was flipping off Aric Almirola down the back straightaway, and Aric wasn't a big fan of it, and he wasn't a big fan of that stuff, and they got into a little bit of a shoving match. Obviously, with them both being Toyota teammates right now, it's very interesting, and I think that was mentally wearing on Bubba just a little bit in a sense, because Bubba's performance was dropping off a bit, but Bubba seems to be getting a lot better, and Aric Almirola did a really great job today as well. Had Aric won the race, I do think there would have been a lot of people that would not have been happy with the win, but I think Aric did a really good job in his return. Now, Aric does have a few more races scheduled to my understanding. I think he's going to be running Watkins Glen in the Go Bowling car, which Aric isn't the greatest road course racer, even though he did win an Xfinity road course race not too long ago, and I think he's got a few more races scheduled for the end of the year. Initially, he had 15 races. He's already won a race so far this year at Martinsville, and I do think that Aric Almirola will be a threat to win more NASCAR Xfinity Series races later this year. We're probably never going to know the official story in regards to what happened. All we know is there was a competition meeting, there was a fight that broke out in that same competition meeting, and there was a lot of frustration and a lot of people that were not happy about everything was handled, and that's why, unfortunately, someone ended up getting suspended for as long as they were suspended. So I'm not surprised to see that Aric really had no comment in the situation. I think he kind of handled it very, very well. He didn't really say anything about Bubba. He basically just kind of said no comment in that situation. I do respect Aric right there for not trying to throw Bubba Wallace under the bus. Both had really good runs this weekend at Indianapolis, and that's all that matters at this point. I'm really glad that one person did not throw the other person under the bus. I think that was a very good move on Aric's part. Even though Aric Almirola may not be the nicest person in the world, I still think it was a great move on Aric's part to not go out there and try to throw Bubba Wallace's name under the bus. I think that's a good move on Aric Almirola's part, in my honest opinion. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Cole Custer. Now, we talked about this on the channel on Saturday morning, but it was officially announced that Cole Custer will be joining the Haas factory team in the NASCAR Cup Series in 2025, driving the number 41 car. There have been talk and speculation that they were going to run the 00 car for Cole Custer in 2025, but they have decided to go ahead and drive the number 41 car for the 2025 season. It was also announced on Saturday as well that Cole Custer and his team will have an RFK alliance. The crew chief is still to be announced at this point, but many have speculated that potentially Jonathan Toney, who's been the crew chief for Cole Custer in the NASCAR Xfinity Series the last year or so, could potentially be the crew chief for Cole Custer this upcoming season at Haas factory. Them getting an RFK alliance is absolutely huge. It's going to be a loose RFK alliance, let's be clear on that, but it's really huge that they are going to have an RFK alliance in 2025. Teams that have had support from RFK have been very successful in recent years. Brad Keselowski won not too long ago at Darlington back in early May, and we've seen Justin Haley and Ricker Racing especially show a lot more pace and speed. And I think that while this team is probably going to struggle at the beginning of the year, I do think Cole Custer will do a solid job next year. Now the big question surrounds how do I think Cole Custer is going to do at the Haas factory team in 2025. Realistically, I think Cole Custer will get some top 10s near the end of the season and some top 15s, but with how competitive the Cup Series field is going to be next year, they're probably going to finish near the bottom of the standings. This is basically going to be the 41 charter that Ryan Preece has had, which we'll talk about him here in just a second. But I think Cole Custer's earned a second chance. He won the Xfinity Series championship last year, and I think he's done a really excellent job in the NASCAR Xfinity Series throughout the whole entire season. And I think he's earned the right and opportunity to move back up to the Cup Series for the 2025 calendar year. Now, my expectations, like I said, I think he probably finished around 26th to 30th in the standings. With how competitive the Cup field is going to be, he's probably going to struggle a little bit. Now, what happens with Ryan Preece? Ryan Preece could go to a team like Ricker Racing next year in Cup, or could go to the Haas factory team. His name has been linked to the Haas factory team for the NASCAR Xfinity Series, and he does bring a little bit of sponsorship with him, but not a massive amount of sponsorship, which will affect him in a little bit of a way going into next year. But I think Ryan Preece would be a good option. Harrison Burns, another name, has been mentioned as a possibility as well. Harrison does have a little bit of sponsorship from Dex Imaging, and I think that Ford really wants to keep Harrison Burton going into 2025. So I think that would be a really good option going into next year as well. But I think this move of moving Cole Custer back up to the Cup Series, I think is a really good move for the team and organization. So we'll have to wait and see what happens in regards to what happens over there. But we'll see Cole Custer move up to the NASCAR Cup Series once again. I think he's earned the right and opportunity. And I think Cole Custer is going to do a lot of great things next year in the 2025 calendar season. And now we're going to jump on to the first of three major stories in today's episode as we're talking about silly season. Now, Bob Pockrass put out an article after it was announced that Cole Custer will be joining the Haas factory team in 2025. And he talked about some of the notable moves that could be happening with the rest of the lineup for 2025. He first begins by talking about 20-11 racing. We know Tyler Reddick is going to be back in the 45 car next year, and we do know that Riley Herbst is a lead candidate to take over the third 23-11 racing seat, but he also talked about Bubba Wallace, and he mentions that Bubba Wallace more than likely will return to 23-11 racing in 2025. While nothing's been formally announced at this time and point, we are expecting that Bubba's going to get a multi-year extension. He's been really upping his performance as of late, and we do think he'll be back in the 23 car next year. He also notes that Hendrick's lineup will not change going into 2025, so Kyle Larson, Chase Elliott, William Byron, Alex Bowman are all set. Same with Team Penske, though Austin Cindric has not officially announced a multi-year extension, but Austin Cindric is going to sign an extension because there's really no other drivers available. They have been looking at putting Chase Briscoe in that seat, but Chase Briscoe is obviously going to Joe Gibbs Racing next year. Now let's talk about Daniel Suarez. Daniel Suarez has not signed a multi-year agreement, though he did note about a week or two ago that he is very close to signing a multi-year contract extension with Trackhouse Racing and is expected to return to Trackhouse Racing in 2025 and stay in the number 99 car. Now we talk about the other Trackhouse car. This apparently is a ride that's in the running between Shane Van Gisbergen and Zane Smith. Though it sounds more likely Zane Smith will not get this third seat for 2025, and it's expected that Shane Van Gisbergen is going to get the third Trackhouse seat in 2025. Shane's been doing an excellent job in the NASCAR Xfinity Series this season. He's been up front consistently. He just picked up a top 5 in Indianapolis. We talked about that early in the episode. And I look at the sponsorship he has. He has Red Bull. he has WeatherTech, and he has a lot of other big companies that are working with him that want to put him up in the Cup Series. And I think he's earned the right and opportunity to move up to the Cup Series once again and be a full-time driver. And in the select Cup starts he's ran, he has gotten better. I think he's led in 5 of his first 6 Cup starts. So I think next year, especially with how much better he's gotten on ovals, he's going to run a lot of ovals at the end of this season. I think this Shane will definitely be ready to move up, and I think he will end up being in a third trackhouse seat next year. Now I move on to RCR. There's going to be some personal changes coming over there next year, but Austin Dillon is going to stick around in the 3 car, and Kyle Busch is expected to be back in the 8 car next year. There was talk about Kyle Busch leaving the team at the end of the year, but we are expecting that Kyle Busch is going to stay in the 8 car in 2025. RCR has been flirting about adding a third charter, but with Haas factory team going to Cup next year with Cole Custer, that will not likely end up happening unless they find a way to get a charter from a team like Kaulig Racing. RCR will not be able to expand going into 2025. Speaking of Zane Smith, Front Row Motorsports has narrowed it down to 2 lead candidates for the 3rd front row seat. Zane Smith and Sam Mayer are the 2 front runners for the 3rd front row seat. Christian Eckes had been linked to this ride recently, but his name's been no longer linked according to Bob, though Christian could go to Kaulig Racing next year. Zane Smith has been doing a good job recently. The performance has been picking up, and I think going to the front row or going back there would make a lot of sense. Sam Mayer has a little bit of sponsorship with him, though, and I think there's a good chance he could go to Front Row Motorsports next year. If Sam Mayer does go over to front row, Conor Zilisch more than likely gets his seat, but there's also talk Conor could take the 9 or the 8 car next year at JRM if Sam Mayer, of course, goes to front row. Erik Jones is expected to be back with Legacy Motor Club going into 2025, but it does need to be noted that nothing's official at this point. He wants a multi-year contract from what I understand, and I think that if he doesn't go back, Corey Heim gets a seat, but Erik Jones more than likely will be in this car once again. Ryan Preece has been linked to Rickwer Racing, but also linked to the Haas factory team for 2025. So Ryan Preece either be part-time in Cup or full-time in the 15, or likely goes to Haas factory in the Xfinity Series next year. Now, talking about Kaulig Racing, AJ Allmendinger and Christian Eckes are 2 of the big names linked there. Ryan Preece, Sam Mayer also candidates for Kaulig Racing in the Cup Series next season. But if AJ can find the funding and sponsorship, he could be full-time in one of those cars. Same as Zane Smith as well, as also been linked to a Kaulig car for next year. Dale Hemrick has not announced a contract extension also with Kaulig Racing for 2025, but we do believe he likely will be back there at least on a part-time basis. And Harrison Burton has been linked to multiple organizations in Cup, but he's also been linked to the Haas factory team for the Xfinity Series next season. Silly season is going to get very interesting over the course of the next few months as more stuff continues to fall in place. I do think over these off weeks, we're going to have more major announcements and more big movement and more big rumbles that are going to come out. We know Carson Hocevar is also going back to Spire despite talking to teams like Trackhouse. We do know he's going to be staying at Spire. But we're expecting some pretty big moves really soon, and I think silly season is going to continue to be really crazy and really wild over the course of the next couple of months. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the first of 2 major stories in today's episode as we're talking about Kyle Busch once again. Now, Kyle Busch flew into Indianapolis on Friday and he appeared on the Pat McAfee show. And he called out multiple drivers over the weekend going into Indianapolis Motor Speedway. He talked about his career up to this point so far and talked about how bad of a season he's had. He basically said that I think at the time, 5 of the last 7, now 6 out of the last 8. But Kyle Busch says that the cars at Rich Hills Racing are not very good. But he does know, I think in the podcast, that they are planning to make some major executive changes over at Rich Hills Racing very, very soon. He began by calling out Ricky Stenhouse Jr. because Pat had asked him about the fight that took place between him and Ricky Stenhouse Jr. back in North Wilkesboro. He also kind of talked about how him and Ricky originally got back in beef in 2018. Remember at Daytona, basically Ricky Stenhouse Jr. was causing a lot of incidents during the super speedways, not just during the Daytona July race, but also during Daytona 500 as well. And Kyle Busch got turned by Ricky in one of those big wrecks, and he coined the phrase, Ricky Spinhouse. And then they were kind of helping each other out for a few months in time. But then all of a sudden, North Wilkesboro, their beef kind of sparked up once again, and Kyle Busch basically talked about Ricky in a light, basically kind of calling him Ricky Spinhouse, and he said he lost his ride at Roush because of the way that he was wrecking a lot of Roush's cars. You go back to 2019, he was driving to 17, and they basically fired him despite signing a multi-year extension through 2023. Ricky got fired and moved over to JTG Doherty Racing. But the big talking point to come out from this podcast is his thoughts on Corey LaJoie. And Kyle Busch went in depth about Corey LaJoie and his thoughts on him. He basically called that Corey LaJoie by saying that Corey pretty much just straight up wrecked me going down the straightaway. I put one block on him, and then Corey, for whatever reason, just made a really, really bad move and wrecked me going into turn number 1. Because we hadn't really heard what Kyle Busch's thoughts until this incident happened. And then he basically went on to say that Corey LaJoie's a liar, texted him. Apparently there was text between both of them, but Kyle never really responded back to those texts. And pretty much Kyle Busch calls Corey LaJoie a liar and says payback is coming. Now NASCAR will probably promote this, but if Kyle Busch does something, they're probably going to fine him. Now, Kyle Busch also continued on by saying that he needs to stop giving Corey LaJoie attention. Now, Corey LaJoie did respond to these comments on Saturday at Indianapolis Motor Speedway from Kyle Busch, and he basically was very mad at Kyle Busch about it. He was not very happy with Kyle Busch's comments. He says he understands that Kyle Busch is frustrated about the situation, but he also says that Kyle Busch is also in the wrong for calling Corey LaJoie a liar. When I look at the situation and see Kyle Busch calling Corey LaJoie a liar, I think that's absolutely wild. And Corey LaJoie is someone, and I say this with no disrespect really to Corey, but he's someone that really never takes accountability for his mistakes and crashes on the racetrack. He's crashed so many cars over the last year or so, and you go back to what happened at Pocono. He took out 6 cars in wall. He probably feels bad for the guys that he ended up wrecking. He was blaming Kyle Busch 4 or 5 different times, initially putting full blame on him, then changing his story multiple different times, including on his Stacking Pennies podcast. And I think Kyle Busch is just fed up with how bad this season has been, and he really needs this break that he's going to need to kind of clear his mind and head. Because if NASCAR sees Kyle Busch go out and do something like this where he does pay Corey LaJoie back, there's a chance and possibility that he might get in trouble. And obviously, you look at Corey LaJoie. He's got a lot of pressure going into next year, because that could be where Kyle Busch goes in the future. If Corey LaJoie does not step up to the plate and run much better, he could lose his ride and Kyle Busch could take that seat. There is a chance of possibility that really could end up happening if we don't see improved performance from Corey LaJoie next season. As for Kyle Busch calling him a liar, I think it's really funny. Corey LaJoie seems, to some people, probably like a two-faced person. And Corey LaJoie, in my opinion, should have gotten a fine or at least some sort of penalty for what happened if we're going to penalize a driver like Bubba Wallace for basically slamming it into Alex Bowman, not really that hard, putting him in the wall at 25 miles an hour under the cooldown lap. I sure as hell think that Corey LaJoie should have gotten a penalty. But since Corey LaJoie technically works for NASCAR in a sense, he kind of got away with it. And I didn't really agree with that either. But Kyle Busch calling Corey LaJoie a liar, I find that to be very, very funny. Now, the question I have is, will NASCAR do something if something happens? I bet you NASCAR will. We do have to remember they have 2 departments. They have a social media department, and they've also got a competition department. So we do need to remember that and keep that in mind, especially if NASCAR decides to go ahead and penalize Kyle Busch for this. I found the comments very funny, though, and it's interesting that Kyle Busch called Corey LaJoie a liar for what happened, and I think it's funny that Corey LaJoie got really offended by Kyle Busch's comments. And now we're going ahead, jump on to the final major story of today's episode as we're talking about Hailie Deegan once again. Now, we've talked about Hailie Deegan a lot on this channel as of recently. A few weeks ago, about 2 weeks ago, as a matter of fact, it was announced that Hailie Deegan would not be returned to AM Racing for the remainder of this year, and she would not be going back to AM Racing in 2025. When she was replaced by Joey Logano for the Chicago Street Course, we all kind of knew that most likely Hailie Deegan was not going to be back at AM Racing. Now, Hailie Deegan, as of late, there were rumors and speculation that she could be going to Indy NXT and running some select races later this season and doing some oval races at the end of the year. But also that she did a Trans Am race very recently, and she ended up finishing 6th, which I thought was a very impressive run. But now there's talk and conversation going on that Hailie Deegan is a legit candidate to potentially head over to the Haas factory team in the NASCAR Xfinity Series in 2025. According to what Joe Custer had stated recently, they have had conversations with Hailie Deegan about potentially taking one of the Haas factory seats for 2025. Now, people like Brickyard have kind of disagreed with this statement, but let me say why I think this would make at least a little bit of sense. Look, I think we all can agree that Hailie Deegan did have a horrendous season this year in the NASCAR Xfinity Series. In the 16 or 17 Xfinity Series races that she ran this year, she only had 4 top 20 finishes. They fired the crew chief halfway through the season, and she didn't even score a top 10. Meanwhile, Joey Logano, in the first race he got behind the wheel, he finished 8th, but Joey Logano was telling him about adjustments to make on his car, which is why that they at least did okay at Chicago, compared to a driver like Hailie Deegan. A team that's only in their sophomore year wasn't going to really help Hailie Deegan. You've got a rookie driver that's kind of helping a rookie crew chief in a sense, so Matt Lucas has work at Joe Gibbs Racing, helping with that. You're really not going to be able to have a lot of the great performances that you're really looking for a rookie driver. It just never was going to work. She needs to go to a team that she will be able to have a lot of success with. Look, she wasn't that great in the Truck Series. I think we all know that. But let's be real and frank. Has Jake Garcia really set the world on fire this year in that 13 truck? I think Jake has had maybe 1 or 2 top 10s, and his average finish is not much better than hers. I think she had like a 19 for 20 average finish. His average finish is like 16 or 16.5. So he's been a little better than her, but he's really not setting the world on fire. And I expect him to make the playoffs this year. But really outside of Ty Majeski, nobody at ThorSport Racing is really setting the world on fire this year. Ben Rose and Matt Crafton are all fighting for playoff runs. And obviously Matt Crafton is a lot older. But we've seen some other drivers go in there, and they've struggled. And Johnny Sauter, who was a previous driver in that 13 truck, although Christian Eckes did a great job with that team, Johnny Sauter drove the 13 truck, and he really didn't do much. So, yes, of course, Johnny Sauter was a much older driver as well. Look, I think we all can agree that Hailie Deegan was not setting the world on fire. But at the same token, at the same time, if you put her with a team and organization that can build around her and can guide her like Joe believes in her, I think that could be something that could really click. And I think her potentially going over to Haas would make a ton of sense. Now, she does go to Haas factory. She needs to have a veteran teammate with her and a veteran crew chief. Why not bring Joe Williams back to work with her in the Xfinity Series? Joe Williams worked with her in Xfinity this year, and Joe Williams really was not the problem at AM Racing. Joe's kind of said that. So I think that would make a ton of sense for that to end up happening. And she also needs a veteran teammate. I already mentioned this a little bit ago, but Ryan Preece's name has been also linked to be going over to the Haas factory team for the Xfinity Series this year, or next year, I should say. And I think that would be a really good move for her as well, to have a teammate like Ryan Preece. Ryan is a really good driver, in my opinion. I know he really hasn't done that great in Cup in recent years, but I do think that Ryan Preece would do good in Xfinity, and I think he'd be a really good guide, and I think he'd be able to find a way to truly help Hailie Deegan come out of her shell and get a lot better. Now, if she does end up going to Haas factory next year, what are my realistic expectations? I think Hailie Deegan does get some top 10s next year. I don't think she's going to get a lot of top 5s, and realistically, because I think it'll be either 0098, she's not going to put up the same performance as Cole Custer or Riley Herbst or her teammate Ryan Preece. But I think if she does get this chance, this will be her last chance to perform, because she is getting a little older. Granted, she just turned 23 over the last week or so, and she did say that they're probably going to be celebrating it sometime this week, so this announcement probably is not too far away. They did say that they're getting really close to announcing their driver lineup, which we do know Ryan Preece, like I said, is a candidate for that ride. But I do think that Hailie Deegan going over there, it does make sense. I think Hailie, like I said, is a talented driver. She isn't like underperforming. She got a top 10 in the Trans Am race, and she was good in other series. And we know, like I've already mentioned, is she's in the running to go to Indy NXT ride and run some select races later this year. So I do think her going to Haas factory would make a lot of sense, and I think she could have some good performances. Again, I don't think she's going to absolutely set the world on fire and go out there and win races on a week-by-week basis, but I do think she will do a solid job, at least a better job than she's done at AM. If she has a group helping her out, I think she will end up doing a better job. I think AM's an organization that we don't even know the future at this point of what that organization is going to look like next year. But if she does go to Haas factory, she needs to have veteran teammates helping her, which is something I think that she will end up having if it does end up coming true. So, that is going to be today's NASCAR news and motorsports news video. I want to thank you guys for watching. Please subscribe to the channel, notifications on, so that if I win a video, it does go live on my channel. Follow me on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram, and support my page as well. Links description below that, and comment your thoughts below on today's episode. What are your thoughts about Hailie Deegan potentially joining Haas factory next year? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And what are your thoughts about Kyle Busch calling Corey LaJoie a liar on the Pat McAfee podcast? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. There won't be any more videos likely dropping on the channel today. Tomorrow there's going to be a silly season update. We'll talk more about Hailie Deegan there. Wednesday there's probably going to be a NASCAR news video dropping. And then on Thursday as well, we'll probably have the top 100 greatest NASCAR drivers in the Cup Series for the 2024 edition dropping on the channel. So anyways, like I said, I want to thank you guys for watching today's episode, and I'll see you guys next time for more great, awesome NASCAR content and other motorsports content on the channel like this. Take care, everybody.